Hello and welcome to Retro Reviews, and welcome to Smash Saturday, where we talk about all things Smash related until we get a new Smash game, whether that be Smash 6 or Smash Ultimate Deluxe. Today I want to shout out my boy Red Beans and Rice, who gave me a full critique of Smash Ultimate in a 4-part essay that I want to be critiquing, or replying to / reacting to today. I think this critique was really interesting, and I think it had a lot of insightful points, a lot of things that I very much agree with as well. So I want to be going over this in full. There are 4 parts. I'll be going over individual parts and my response to them. I'll be showing you a screen recording of the comment. I'll slowly be scrolling through while I read it from my paper, so you don't just watch me staring at me reading at this paper. And I'll be going over in each part individually and telling you my own thoughts on it. So thank you so much, Red Beans and Rice. Love all your comments. I've loved seeing you comment on so many things, engaging with so much of my content. I really, really appreciate it. So this one's for you. So let's get into part 1 here. This talks about the roster, obviously the major pull of any Smash game being, the characters in it. And one of the flaws that they point out here is that there's just a lot of characters that don't feel like they really belong in the game. They point out specifically Lucas and Ice Climbers. They say they weren't popular 40 years ago. They're even less so now. On the other hand, who's going to see Lucas and say, Lucas is in this game? No way, they added my boy. I'm going to buy Smash now. We need a roster that appeals to a large audience, one that represents gaming as a whole. We don't need 100 characters to accomplish that. We also need characters to possess interesting movesets that keep uniqueness intact, preferably using the source material, instead of doing things like recycling movesets over and over, or specific moves. You see characters borrow heavily from other characters. Cites Ganondorf as an obvious example of someone who borrows almost their entire moveset from Captain Falcon. Other ones, you just have like up specials. We have tether recoveries, teleport recoveries, uppercut recoveries. They're almost identical. The recycling steals diversity from the individual characters. They recommend a more diverse moveset and a smaller roster in general to cope with this, because doing individual movesets would take a lot of resources. They also talk about removing DLC, since it's kind of an annoying roadblock for a lot of players, since you're incentivizing people to pay, and typically that means the character has to be really good, and so that it just upsets the balance of the cast. They don't like that very much. Also, having in-game purchases, they don't mind that, but when it comes to being at a disadvantage because you don't have the DLC characters, they don't appreciate that nearly as much. They also talk about how they should have their own place in the meta. They cite Dr. Mario versus Mario. Why would you ever use Dr. Mario when Mario is just so superior in every single way? Talking about balance specifically here, you'd think that the game would be more balanced by the end of this life cycle, but clearly Steve and Sonic are super dominant. Sakurai didn't really do a ton to balance the overall roster, in their opinion here, and it's hard to balance individual characters. It's also about balancing their moves in relativity to each other, There's so many characters that have just absolute BS moves. Characters like Cloud rely too heavily on their back air, making them really hard to deal with. And obviously a more well-rounded Smash Bros. Roster would be a better overall thing here. So let's talk about part 1. I agree with a lot of what Red Beans and Rice is saying here. I think having a large cast is interesting. Having a lot of characters is an interesting thing. I like having a big roster. And I've even come around to the idea that having a bigger roster than Ultimate would actually be a good thing for it. But I'm also really open to the idea of cutting down and bringing some more familiar characters to the forefront. I agree. Ice Climbers hasn't been relevant in a very long time. They had an NES game, and we haven't seen anything from them since. Captain Falcon, unfortunately, doesn't have a game in a million years. I would argue that Captain Falcon is one of the faces of Smash, and I think getting rid of him would be a mistake. But Earthbound, can we get rid of Ness and Lucas? Probably. As much as I love Mother 3, as much as I love Lucas as a character in his game, there's not a whole lot of relevance there. I do agree with that critique there. I do think that a smaller cast would make for better movesets in general. It would make for a better opportunity to revamp movesets. I do think that would be much easier than having a ginormous roster. You're going to have to recycle moves. You're going to have to recycle things like Echo characters for ideas, because it's just going to take too much work to have unique moves for every single character. It isn't going to work that way. If you have a much more pared down roster, add some new faces in from franchises we haven't seen before, I do think there is a possibility for a really solid game there. So I do agree with a lot of the critiques. I can see why Nintendo would opt for something like a larger roster and recycling moves a lot more. It's going to cut down development time like crazy. It's going to take a lot less resources. They're going to be able to make a more cohesive game instead of having to balance individual moves. I can imagine, like, I do agree that moves like Cloud's back air or Steve's, most of his broken moves, what the heck is that? Why don't we have more balanced moves across the board? But I can imagine if everyone had a unique back air, trying to balance around each individual thing where we have sword characters versus grapplers versus item use characters and zoners and stuff. It's going to be really hard to have unique moves that are also extremely balanced around each other. Using source material is great, but at the end of the day, it's going to be really hard to make that balance. So I do agree with a lot of the points there. I do think it's really difficult. So I see where Nintendo's coming from here. With that out of the way, let's move on to part 2 here. Part 2 is talking about a story mode. Now, I have a lot to say about this one. I think they pretty much hit it on the nail on the head here. Filling story mode is crucial for the casual side of Smash Brothers. They talk about like World of Light being a little... I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but the spirit battles just don't do it for Red Beans and Rice here. Getting some of these spirit battles, they're just kind of gimmicky. They don't offer a lot in terms of challenge, or they're way too challenging because they're too gimmicky, and collecting spirits isn't exactly fun. It becomes pretty monotonous. The difficulty is all over the place. They're often gimmicky. Have we regressed? Where's the story mode of Smash Brothers like in Brawl? Even honestly, like it just... it just lacks a lot of substance that something like Subspace Emissary had. And what's crazy about that, they point out, is that came out such a long time ago and we haven't seen any improvement. We've only seen some degradation or some regression here, which kind of sucks. Deviates from the standard, get the opponents to a high percent, knock them off the stage type gameplay that we're used to, and instead makes it a really gimmicky mess. Again, all over the place. The trophy system they talk about outclasses spirits in almost every single way. They feel a lot lazier. They are just PNGs after all. And so it makes them feel, because they're so numerous, it makes them feel a little less substantial. It feels like when I earn a spirit, it's not that impactful. And because there are so many, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. You have a lot of representation of a ton of franchises. I remember when they did the Resident Evil crossover, I thought that was really cool. But at the same time, do they really matter all that much? In their opinion, it has led to the downfall of the game because Sakurai has prioritized quantity over quality. The World of Light that we got, Sakurai should have tried to revitalize the Subspace Emissary formula, and simple as that. And I have a lot to say here. I think that Red Beans and Rice is 100% correct. I think World of Light is a huge letdown. I didn't even finish the story mode because I thought it was just all that boring. I've always been a more competitive Smash player anyway, but honestly, I typically finish the story modes. Melee, for instance, I loved the adventure mode, even though it was very samey across the board, playing with all these different characters and doing pretty much the same thing over and over again was still fun because it was unique, because it was just different enough, because every character moves differently, every character has different speed. I really enjoyed doing adventure mode. I loved doing the bonus modes as well. I had a lot of fun with those, and I think it's kind of interesting that we've kind of lost that. I think it's weird that we have a lack of a lot of modes as well. I think the inclusion of certain modes like home run contests coming back was huge. I'm so glad about that. But break the targets is a huge one. I understand doing an individual course for every single character in a huge roster is obviously going to take way more than when they did it back in 64 and Melee. But that was one of the most fun modes. Having a leaderboard, I think that's something that they mentioned here. If I glossed over it in part 2, if it's not in part 2, it's in part 4 or part 3. But having a leaderboard would be huge. And Red Beans and Rice mentions that having a leaderboard to compete against your friends 4 times would be such a huge thing. There's a speedrunning community for break the targets in Smash 64 and Smash Melee. Why don't we have something like that? It would be so fantastic. And I do agree that a casual side of Smash is really, really important, despite being primarily a competitive player myself. And story mode is so cool. Subspace Emissary still stands as one of the coolest experiences in all of gaming, in my opinion. As funny as that sounds for like a Smash game story mode, but honestly, it was so fantastic. It was this crossover event. You had Snake and Sonic in there. It was a really big deal. Imagine what they could have done with a larger larger roster. I think World of Light had it right with the cutscenes. It set up an interesting world, and it ultimately let us down. I don't think it was nearly as interesting as anything that has come since Subspace Emissary. I mean, the Subspace Emissary was just fantastic. And again, I know it'd be hard to implement, take a lot of resources, but the casual side of Smash is really important. I think that we need to have a better story mode going forward. Let's move on to part 3. This is going to be online. Oh boy. That's how that's how it starts here, and I agree. Where do I begin? There's so many problems. The biggest thing is the 6 frames of input lag, which is the highest in the series. I wasn't aware of that. There's no set amount of frames that online play adds, but it is quite a bit. Enough frames of lag to significantly worsen the experience. It's going to alter the tier list significantly. Steve and Sonic are indirectly buffed online because it's harder to react to burst options and these really big moves. Most effective answer would be implementing rollback netcode. Most fighting games at this point are implementing rollback netcode. Heck, even Melee does. That's not in the essay here, but Melee has their own online rollback netcode. Let's talk about GSP later down in this part here. It's a terrible metric, an abysmal metric. It's a meaningless number. You should be getting experience points. You should have ranks. Talks about how we only have Elite Smash or not Elite Smash, and other games have, tons of different ranks. 20 ranks or so would be ideal. Games like Rocket League, Rainbow Six Siege, and Tekken 7 establish ranking systems, give their players a method of gauging one another's skill levels, motivates them to exceed their rank further. Plenty of games do this. They could have gone with a basic bronze, silver, gold, but no, they went with 2 different modes. The inability to taunt in quick play is unreasonable. I agree with that 100%. There's also preferred rules that don't seem to work typically. You'll just match into people that don't share your rule set plenty of times. There's no division between the casual and competitors like there was in Smash 4 with For Fun and For Glory. You should be able to see people's rule sets and accept them instead of being put up against someone I don't want to fight. Much rather wait a little bit longer to play a 2-stock free-for-all stamina match on Great Cave Offensive with items on. Better solution than being able to accept rule sets is to have tournament legal rule sets be the only option. Quick play is meant for competitors. You want to play on your casual rule set? Go play battle arenas. That's what they are for. And then the mind of a casual player wants to have fun, doesn't take the game too seriously. The casual doesn't care about pushing their rank. On the other hand, the competitor wants to play the game at the highest level. They want to be improving. I do agree about this separation of space here. I think that's a really important aspect. Being able to switch in between matches is really important too. This was something we saw in Smash 4 where you could switch characters in between matches. You could counterpick and do things a little bit differently. But this just kind of shoehorns you into one thing, and it's designed really poorly. Quick play in Elite Smash is just not very good. And obviously the lag is bad as well. They go back to lag talking about it. This would be an easier fix. Make it so the 2 individuals are battling influence severity of the lag. There's another problem though, not being able to change your character stage. We talked about this in just a minute ago. It just adds a lot of complexity to an already bad situation with online being so poor. They talk about a good example being the Battle Hub from Street Fighter 6 instead of having this system instead, where you have interconnected arenas and you can seamlessly go from player to player. Not being able to do something like this really limits what you can do with an online play. They want to talk about being able to look at people's bios and look at their accounts and be able to make your specific messages and everything. But they talk about online just being such a big deal and being super important. I 100% agree with this. I think there's not a whole lot to say. They talk about this at length here, and so I'm going to keep letting this scroll so you can read it in full. But I do agree here that online is pretty poor. So let's talk about online here. Online has been a sore spot for Smash Brothers players since the game has launched because the netcode is really abysmal. They have not really done anything to improve it. I think at one point, actually the minimum amount of frames of NLAG is 5 frames now, if I'm not mistaken. I think they did upgrade it from 6 to 5 at one point, which is still unacceptable. It's still not great. However, we have seen competitive players do really well by grinding online, specifically in Japan. But that's because they're really close together. Their internet on the whole is just better, and so it's easier to get matched into the kind of matches you want to play that will actually help you grind. In America, at least, it's not like that at all. Finding online play that is actually quality, it sucks. It's abysmal. It doesn't happen hardly ever, and it's because of the NLAG system and everything. It's really bad. I have never liked the online system. It's really abysmal a way to practice. I always preferred offline practice. I agree pretty much wholeheartedly with Red Beans and Rice here. Online play is bad. It's always been bad. Rollback netcode would be much better. Having a battle hub would be really sick. I love fighters. I love the way that the ArcSys games do that kind of interactivity and being able to accept your matches, see the signal strength between you, being able to accept rule sets. I agree wholeheartedly. Having a rank system would be sick. I think he hit it right on the head here. Like 100% agree. Online play needs to be overhauled for the next Smash game. And if not, it's going to be a bad time. So let's move on to the final part here, part 4, which is the nitpicks. Now moving on to the nitpicks, we're going to cover the stage builder. This is something I'm not nearly as versed with, so I'll just kind of, I'll gloss over this a little bit, but I will add my thoughts here. Talking about how like regular forms of stage removed, just having stage builder, limitless potential here, wants some more like background, some more materials and shapes and everything, more customization. I agree that the Smash stage builder has not been nearly as good. I remember really enjoying it during Brawl, and I have not had any fun with it here. They have done some good things with it online. I've seen some of the ways that they share stages and everything, but for me, it's not for me. I have not really found my way here, and I think that the point they're making here is that it needs to be more robust and a little bit easier to use. And they also talk about unlocking characters, just having them unlocked from the get-go. There's no surprise anymore. We're being spoiled by all the characters. We have reveal trailers now. There's no way to keep it a secret. You're not going to play 24 hours and suddenly unlock Mewtwo and be like, oh my goodness, this is the most amazing revelation ever. And it just makes it a little more tedious here to unlock them. So why not just have them at the get-go here. Also talks about training modes being rather lackluster. Instead of like training on just the basics, should be able to train you on how to do things like ledge guard and ledge trap and everything. Displaying hitboxes would be really important. I agree with that 100%. Viewing frame data, breaking things down at more like a micro level would be really fantastic. Even if they don't understand, if like a more casual player doesn't understand these things, it can help them to see the more minutia side of things if they want to get into the competitive side. The CPUs are too easy. Novice can beat them with relative ease. Whether they have the same predictable habits or they don't respond well to being camped, they could be programmed better. Back to the tutorial, they say, talking about a little bit more the teach the player the tactics like with punishing and edge guarding, like I mentioned before. Game modes, this is what I was talking about earlier. I forgot this was in part 4. Game modes being a pretty lackluster and Ultimate. Having more casual game modes is really important, and the decision of keeping the home run contest is fantastic, but Target Smash is missing. I 100% agree. We talked about that a little bit earlier. SSBU should really step it up in that game mode department. There's greater matters in game modes, but it sure would go a long way for a lot of players. A leaderboard would be really important. This is one I thought would be really interesting. A character customization and the in-game currency. Being able to change your alts, make your own alts, change the small colors on Mario. I think it talks about like Mario's overall is a seafoam green color. You can do that. Save your creation, use it in combat. Share it with other people, unlock different paints and everything with your in-game currency so it actually has some meaning here. And then being able to just make your characters super customizable. They call it Smashbucks. I like that. I think Smashbucks is a cool idea for the in-game currency. And just stuff like that. So let's talk about this here. I agree that the nitpicks here, I think casual modes need to be a little bit more robust. If we got Target Smash back, I would be over the moon. But again, for a ton of characters, so if we're pairing it back, I think it would be much easier. If we have got 40 to 50 characters in our base roster, boom, we've got enough to do Target Smash. It might take a lot of work. Maybe that's something they can add down the line, but I do think it would be worth it. And having these leaderboards would be fantastic. I also think in-game customization for your characters would be stellar. Imagine like designing your character's costume and then being able to share that with other people or inspiring other people to make really unique things. I think that would be super cool. I think that would be fun, even if it was just basic stuff that you just have like a color palette to pick from and you can make your character any costume you want. I think that's fantastic. Being able to unlock different things using the in-game currency, 100% big ups here. So I do agree with most of the critiques of Ultimate. I do think there are a lot of problems. I do think that DLC is important for a game and the overall longevity of it, especially from Nintendo's side of things. They don't like to support games for super long, and DLC is a way to at least get some more balance patches down the line. I haven't been super satisfied with the way that they balanced Ultimate by the end of the game, but at least we got balance patches all the way up until the end, and DLC does help for that. I also agree. I'd rather just have all the characters in the roster, and I don't want to have to buy them anyway. But if we're not going to be getting these characters, or
I pay a couple extra bucks and we do get them in the game, I'd probably rather have them in the game. But that's not always the case because I don't want to have Steve in the game. And I actually don't like most of Fighters Pass 2. I didn't like Byleth when they got announced. So there is a lot of critiques with DLC, and I do think that Nintendo's philosophies with DLC are going the wrong direction. So I mostly agree. And some of the things I'm like, oh, but what if we got Crash Bandicoot and we couldn't get him in the base roster? So I do think that this essay here was pretty darn cool. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Go give my boy Red Beans and Rice some love. I think that they would really appreciate it. I again, love all the comments. I love all the engagement. And so I really wanted to make this one. So hopefully you're enjoying it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.